I have heard very little that's persuasive in support of Prop 19. I think that if the supporters of legalizing marijuana in California had written a more straightforward attempt to legalize it, they probably would find a broader base of support. But this really establishes the right to smoke marijuana as a civil right in California. And that creates a whole bunch of sort of strange complexity. Some of the opponents came to speak to the Times editorial board about it, and one of the things they were talking about is that you have workplace rules, federal workplace rules, that require you to certify a drug-free workplace. Well, what happens if you have an employee in one of those workplaces who now asserts his civil right to smoke marijuana? You have the obvious conflict of sort of different priorities legislatively. And I think it's not helped by the fact, its prospects are not helped by the fact that the federal government, in the position of the Attorney General, just announced the other day that they would continue to enforce marijuana laws in California, even if this passes. So you're going to clear. Again, I think there might be a sensible way to approach marijuana legalization in California, but this measure creates a lot of complexity that's going to make it, I think, extremely complicated if it passes. Well, Proposition 20 and 27 obviously need to be considered in one breath. They are clearly flip sides of the same coin. Proposition 20, well, going back in time a little bit, the California voters in 2008, I believe it was, approved the creation of a citizens commission to oversee redistricting. There's very specific, that had been a long-fought battle. In fact, voters had rejected it in previous campaigns, but did approve it in 2008. And I think really the campaign's central emphasis in that race was that the legislature should not be able to draw their own seats, for the obvious reason that legislators, one thing, maybe the only thing that Republicans and Democrats in Sacramento have in common is a desire to protect incumbents. And that's what the process was had largely become, was creating districts that were safe seats for the people who held them. Now that the Citizens Commission has been approved, but has yet to actually oversee a redistricting. So what comes along now is Prop 27, which is basically the people who never liked the Citizens Commission in the first place, mostly Democrats in Sacramento, want to get rid of it and return that power to the legislature because they want it for all the same reasons that I think voters took it away from them, that it did create this kind of conflict. Now, 20 is the other side of that. 20 says not only are we not going to get rid of the commission, we love the idea of the commission so much that we're going to extend it to Congress. I would say this, the argument for extending it to Congress is not as strong in some ways as the argument for applying it to state legislative seats, because there isn't the direct conflict of interest. You don't have, members of Congress don't draw their own seats, even now. It's the legislature that does it. But there is a kind of community of incumbency, and the members of the state legislature are drawing seats, and sometimes to please their colleagues in Congress, sometimes with an idea of running for one of those congressional seats. So the underlying theory of the Citizens Commission, that this is a piece of business that is best handled outside of our political process, applies to Prop 20 as well. And so for people who believe that this is not an appropriate process to have vested in the legislature, Prop 20 is just a natural extension of that argument. Proposition 23, I really think, is a stalking horse proposal. It is, if you look at the definition that it uses, the criteria it uses by which to suspend AB 32, it would result in an almost permanent suspension of AB 32. It's very hard to imagine AB 32 the economy ever being so robust for so long that AB 32 could be allowed to take effect. And frankly, the reason that they're arguing it as a suspension rather than as a repeal is that they know that AB 32 is popular, and that environmental protection and greenhouse gas measures are popular in California. Governor Schwarzenegger's gotten a lot of credit, deservedly, for having supported a really ambitious environmental agenda in the state. The folks who are supporting the repeal of AB 32, or I'm sorry, the suspension of AB 32, would support the repeal if they thought they could get it through, and they can't. So instead what they've done is they've devised a measure that would effectively repeal it while nominally suspending it. So it's, for anyone who supports AB 32, Proposition 23 is clearly a non-starter. It's helpful that the numbers are just reversed on it. It makes it easier to remember. On Proposition 25, I think it's clear that for many years what Democrats thought they would do is not have to address the two-thirds threshold on the budget, because eventually they would get to two-thirds of the legislature and the problem would sort of solve itself. They've gotten locked at a few votes short of that in recent years, and it has created these long budget standoffs that are very frustrating for everyone involved and very harmful to the state and to its finances. Therefore, now they've come back and said, well, let's reduce it to a majority, which would make California sort of in line with almost all the other states in the country. Yeah, on the question, and I think that there's a sort of logic to that. That why create the situation where a very small number of legislators can hold out and extract a huge amount in return for their budget votes. It's also worth noting, though, that whatever the threshold is, someone is always going to be the vote that puts them over. So that person is always going to have leverage, whether it's 2/3, 3/4, or a half. So I don't know that the fundamental dynamic of the budget process will change that much. I mean, I think it will be easier for a governor. But imagine, for instance, that Meg Whitman is governor. If Meg Whitman is governor, she's still going to need to pull a lot of Democrats across her side of the aisle, assuming that she's going to want a Republican-backed budget. That's going to be hard, whether it's 2/3. It's almost impossible to imagine at a 2/3 level, but it's going to be hard even with half. Similarly, Jerry Brown, if you lower it, Jerry Brown has often been a sort of iconoclastic Democrat. I suspect not all Democrats would line up to vote for a Jerry Brown budget. So it's not going to make the work of getting a budget simply disappear. Now, as to the question of whether it's a way of bringing in tax hikes, the budget obviously includes revenue as well as expenditures. And when they approve a budget, they are approving a package. In fact, it's often done on a whole series of votes that they vote on different pieces of the budget. So I suspect there will be arguments about whether either taxes or fees are being slipped in without the benefit of the 2/3 threshold. Clearly, no one wants to run on that. Everyone wants to sort of send out supporters of the reduction from 2/3 to a half want to send the signal that voters can approve this without fear that it's a subversive way of raising their taxes. You could be sure that would be the next fight in Sacramento, though, should this thing pass. Prop 26 addresses what has become a source of much anxiety in Sacramento in recent years, which is the sense that we are using fees to pay for things that taxes used to, for the specific reason that they're not subject to the same kind of threshold. To be honest with you, would this measure cure that? I mean, my sense is no, but it's done, I think, mostly for political purposes to try to, again, send a signal to voters that they are protected from the results of these reforms being exorbitant new fees or higher taxes.